Obviously, the discussion topic today is public-private partnerships. We know that a lot of communities, governments, they do see broadband as essential infrastructure, whether it be wireless, fiber, whatever the infrastructure is to get there. They know that that's going to support economic development, education, healthcare, digital equity, all these things. The elephant in the room, of course, though, is how do you make that happen? And the topic of public-private partnerships is obviously in the news a lot. The big question is, what are the different types of public or private and private partnerships?
Yeah, I think that, when we think about that, Nick, there's probably three foundations to build on, and of course, so many additional layers to that. But I think of private investment and public facilitation. I think of private execution and public funding. I think of more of a shared investment and operational risk, right? So I think there's probably a lot of different models that are within each one of those. And I think with today's group here, it'd be good to kind of peel back the onion on some of these, as some of the teams had experience with many different variations of this. So I guess maybe we should just kind of maybe hit each one of these and think about, because Nick and I, we were talking earlier, and thinking about private investment and public facilitation. What would be interesting is what are you guys seeing where you're seeing private investment come in, but what have you seen as positive examples of how the public is helping to facilitate, right, that investment, right? What are they doing to try and encourage that private sector to come in and invest into their particular town or municipality? Russ, why don't we kick it off with you?
Yeah, I mean, a couple of thoughts right away come to mind. Here in Washington State, we've got things called public utility districts, and our public utility districts are similar to rural electric cooperatives, just a little bit different. And here you see the public utility districts really building out infrastructure, primarily open access infrastructure. However, here we are in legislative session, and guess what bill's hitting the floor? Hey, we want retail authority, not just to be wholesale players, right? So it becomes kind of an interesting conversation. But here, public infrastructure, we've got 3 counties in the middle of our state that are about 75, 80% built out fiber to the home, all in the backs of the public utility district's infrastructure, where they allow private providers to come in and provide service on that infrastructure. So the private doesn't have to invest in the capital up front. They just come in and partake on the infrastructure that's on the back end. And we're seeing very good success here in some areas. Grant County here, we've got, I think it's 17 providers that compete on that infrastructure for the premise-based opportunities. So, it can work really well. The challenge becomes, right, as we start to get into that last mile, the challenge becomes that public infrastructure in areas that are already built, and it's hard for a network to pass by that rich area, and just focus on those scraps out in the ancillary areas of the region. So it becomes that real tentative area that you dance in. And so we're in it right now. I mean, we've got a big bill right now that's saying public utility districts should have retail authority, blanket retail authority, no consideration for anything, just go. And obviously, I have a problem with that as a past provider, and I think the privates will say, that's a hard one for me because I've got a lot of investment here, and I've taken risk, and I've gone out of beyond over the tips of my skis on some of these investments because I believe that I'm going to have the integrity of that business without unfair competition. So it's an interesting game, but we are seeing some good success here in that wholesale area.
With the first example, Russ, you talked about, what was that? Was that Grant that you said?
Grant County, yeah.
Grant County, and wow, you've got a lot of ISPs partnering. So what on that model, is that kind of an open access model?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Got it. And are the ISPs coming in and just simply leasing fibers?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. So the town's just really owning the fiber, probably locating, maintaining it, but they're not an ISP. They're not a competitive, threat. I think
I'll tell you, Brian, I had a really good conversation with him today because one of the representatives that's come forward with this retail bill, here's the big challenge, right? The challenge is you've got PUDs that operate in areas, or rural electric cooperatives that operate in areas where there's incumbents that are not going to build out, just don't have incentive to build out, will not build out. Wyoming, we had our big incumbent there walk away from its carrier of last resort responsibility, right? So you have that going on. There, I say, Katie, bar the doors, let these guys go. Retail authority all day long, right? But in areas where you've got competition, it's we got to honor some of that private investment. So here, that Grant County PUD actually came in essentially kind of opposed to the retail bill, saying, look, that's going to screw up what we have going on here. We've got a good thing going on. So it kind of threw a grenade in the cornflakes for the representative today. And it's all happening as we speak. So good time to have this conversation.
Yeah, no, I find that so interesting because it's like, wait, that's a great, what I would say success of private and public coming together where it sounds like both sides are winning, right?
Right.
And then ultimately the constituents are obviously winning, most of all, which is so important. And I think when we think about private and public relationships, thinking about where this new legislative bill is going is super interesting, because I get it in some aspects, but I also get the how a lot of the private ISPs are really going to be turned off, that the state might be turning against them.
Yeah,
right?
we have to add some language in there, right? There's got to be some language around served, unserved, and that's going to be the play here that's going to probably blow this thing up.
And what language would you put in there, Mr. Worthen, as a service provider?
Let's help Russ with that.
Businesses need to protect themselves too, right? I think we all believe in the greater good, but you're a for-profit business.
Yeah, and I'm the business that Russ talks about, where we put our own funds in, we borrowed money on our own backs, and we're borrowing money on a shorter term than utilities have access to. In fact, the PUDs up in Washington, if you look at that, those were established from a fiber standpoint and those open networks back in the BTOP days. So it was early on compared to other areas like in Fort Collins or somewhere like that. So the interesting part about this is providers in the PUD have literally put equipment in. I've got equipment in a couple PUDs up in Washington as well, and selling on those networks to my clients up there. The investment required to hang fiber, to extend laterals, that's a big investment. And to, ask a private company to stand by and watch public funds be used for that, that's tough. And the hard part is too, the utilities can actually borrow on a longer term. So you add that mix in. What's happening is at a 30,000 foot level, the market is seeing private providers cherry pick areas or look at areas with certain density. And if it's an underground area to serve residential, maybe skipped over, right? Because of the cost. And so the public is saying, we can't do this, but you also can't do it on the back of private investment. And then you've got equity funds coming in, and you've got public companies getting raked over the coals. There is no perfect mix here, right? There's like, that's the purpose of this topic today, is how do you get into a kumbaya, sit around Russ's campfire situation and have every party and have every party agree on a direction? Because the other interesting part about this is management changes within government every 4 years, 8 years. So any well-intentioned public network that partners with a provider actually is at risk later on as this change happens, right? And so I could see the standpoint of the provider in state of Washington going to the PUD and saying, I thought we had something good here, because there is that need to have a relationship and to sit around the campfire and agree that everybody has a job. Everybody has a role.
I guess take it even a step further on the different types of service providers, right? From between the service provider like yourself or Zach, service providers you deal with like WISPs, right? Like they all have this, both of you guys have the same goal, trying to provide service, but it's different technology, it's a different approach, and sometimes even different funding, right?
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. So where we've seen partnership work, it's wireless internet service providers who need assets. They need height, they need towers, they need water towers to be able to um, uh, beat physics and beat the earth to deliver point to multi-point capabilities to their rural communities. And then you've got the municipalities or the utilities that they'll trade and they'll say, you know what, we won't charge you rent for that asset. You can put this on top of our building and you'll be able to deliver internet access. But we want transport to be able to deliver our two-way radio traffic or our SCADA data for utilities or whatever it is. So we've seen cooperation there. And in just hearing Brian W. talk about everyone and having responsibilities and skipping over neighborhoods and things like that, there's we all have a responsibility and the diligence that we need to do to connect students and people that have been forced into their homes to work from home. And just collaboration and cooperation is absolutely needed, especially with COVID-19. And I know we're right on the brink of all getting vaccinated here, but there is still this huge digital divide. And Nick, working with you and your team last year, one of the sound bites or the facts that came to the forefront was America was 20th in broadband connectivity. I'm like, how can we as America be 20th with all of our technological advancements, with all of our federal funding? It's like, you got to be kidding me. There's no way that statistic is real.
Yeah. I guess to go back to the probably Eric and Russ, like from a public perspective, is the model, Brian went through couple different versions of the public-private partnerships. Do you guys think from a public perspective, like, have we cracked the nut on the right model, or are we actually still trying to figure it out?
Well, I liked I like Brian's comment actually about you need to kind of understand what the makeup of the community is and kind of understand what their need is and how things can change. I think that's especially from a state like Idaho, where you have a metropolitan area that has 780,000 people in it, and then you have townships and unincorporated areas and communities, especially ones that I've been working in recently that have 500 people, 200 people. Working with them on their broadband plan and kind of helping them understand their need. And you have a part-time mayor, you have a part-time city clerk, and that's it. And they're kind of at a loss on what to do next and where to and at a loss for time, which is, I think, the biggest challenge for a lot. Is you have someone has a deep love for that community, but struggles to have the expertise to cut because they haven't spent 30 years in the world of broadband, and they're just kind of understanding what they're hearing from community members saying, listen, we have a need, what can you do? So I think that's where the key is really understanding and kind of figuring out what your assets are in the community and how you can best tailor that and tailor the approach. Certainly when we used $50 million worth of CARES Act dollars to deploy 30, and we ultimately reimbursed $38 million worth of broadband grants projects across the state of Idaho. So around 83 projects we completed over the course of 6 months in about 147 communities that we touched through those in about 30,000 households. So, but to Brian's point, I worked in Southeast Idaho on a project that was running fiber through a town of 300 people, or worked on a fixed wireless solution in one of the counties that in Lewis County that covered a quarter of the entire population in that county through like 12 towers that they built out. And so to be able to kind of go to legislators in that area and say, listen, again, you need, some people may want, fiber to the home, but listen, through this dollar, this grant, we were able to kind of connect a fourth of the county to a fixed wireless option that provides them with broadband right now, is a monumental achievement and something to kind of, and so again, it's super complex, and that's why we don't have an answer for it right now. I mean, if this problem was easy, it would have been solved.